Hey everyone, Nick Yuskevich back with Daily Fantasy Winners. Got the next episode of Tee to Green here for you. It's for the Waste Management Phoenix Open this week. I'm going to apologize here just kind of a little bit in advance. I'm kind of battling a sore throat. I hope you can hear my voice okay, so you might have to turn up your volumes a little bit with this, but hopefully it's not too bad. And so I'll just kind of go through the Waste Management here real quick before we get into the top picks, or the top golfers, I should say. And that is just that this is a pretty good field. It usually is every year. It's a very fun tournament, I think. It's one of the best ones you can possibly go to in terms of just having a blast. It's always good weather, obviously, in Phoenix, pretty much every single year. Everybody gets liquored up, in particular, at the stadium hole on the 16th hole. For those of you that maybe just for whatever reason don't know, I'm sure all of you do that are watching this. This is the tournament with the stadium hole where, there's a par 3 16th where there's bleachers around, built like a stadium, essentially around the entire golf hole. Everybody gets, just drinking beer and all that kind of stuff, and then they boo bad shots, and then they applaud or go nuts for for shots that get really close to the hole, or a hole in one like Tiger did 20 years ago, and when Francesco Molinari did a few years ago, and things like that. So and people throw out gifts and things like that, or hand out gifts, and that's always fun, and I think they still do that. So in any case, the last few holes are particularly fun, like holes 15 through 18. 15, 17, 18 have water on them. 15's a cool par 5. 17's a fun short par 4. A lot of people try and drive it, and then 18's kind of a difficult driving hole actually on the par 4 18th, but so it's a lot of fun. And so as far as anything, as far as difficulty, it's on the easier side. I think it's around top 10 easiest in terms of the average winning score. Maybe it's top 12 or something like that in terms of relation to par for the average score. So it is on the easier side. It's a pretty straightforward course. There isn't a lot of variance with this tournament. It's usually not super windy. It's usually not, it's usually you don't get a bunch of rain or wind and stuff like that. You usually don't get that here at TPC Scottsdale, and so it's usually pretty straightforward. And usually the best golfers are usually here pretty much rewarded for playing well. There's just not a lot of variance usually with things that go on here, and so the greens aren't these aren't the Poana greens where the ball's bouncing all over the place. Sometimes later in the day, it's just not things like that, and the greens are kind of on the easier side a little bit, but so there are some couple things that slightly statistically correlate, like strokes gained tee to green and strokes gained approaching the green. There's slight correlations, nothing too big this week. Definitely not like driving distance like it was last week, as many of you saw. Strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained, the strokes gained off the tee and the driving distance are big factors, obviously, as you saw at Torrey Pines. Well, unless you're Tiger, and then you just putted your brains out. He wasn't very good tee to green, but his short game was fantastic, and good for him. So, but in any case, we will move on to the most expensive golfers. So we'll talk about the top 5 guys here on DraftKings between Hideki Matsuyama, Jordan Spieth, Jon Rahm, Ricky Fowler, Justin Thomas. So I will say that I'm kind of slightly, not intentionally really, it's just kind of for some other reasons, but I'm kind of going away from the course history in general with just how this sets up here this week for these top golfers. Hideki's the most expensive on DraftKings, barely, by $100, $11,500. He is the second most expensive on FanDuel by $100 to Jordan Spieth, of course, as well. As many of you probably know by now, Hideki Matsuyama, he has a very good course history here. He has played here 4 times. His worst finish here is 4th, and he's won here back-to-back season the last 2 years. So he finished first. Yeah, like I said, last 2 years, finished 2nd in 2015 and 4th in 2014. So he's killed it here. Hideki's a very good player, and he's a very good tee to green player. So this isn't this isn't a shocker that he's played well here by any means of the imagination. He's one of the top golfers. It is a little crazy of how well he's done, and I think there's definitely some variance in that for how well he has done. But Hideki this is a good course for him. It seems like, at least in 4 years. But I do think there's a little variance in it. As far as it relates to Hideki this year, there is something I don't like about what's going on, though, with Matsuyama. And that is the fact that he's gaining 0.61 strokes putting. Hideki usually is a mediocre putter. He is an average putter at best. Our model basically predicts him to be just the slimmest of margins below an average putter. And so for him to gain 0.61 strokes out of the gate now here in the short end of the season is not that's probably not going to be something sustainable for him. He could definitely improve putting, and he could definitely be above average and something like that. I mean, Hideki's still kind of on the young side as far as his career goes, but 0.61 strokes is a lot. So I do think that that's going to regress here a little bit over the rest of the season. And so, and I think if you take a look at the odds per dollar for Hideki, you're seeing Hideki's odds are just slightly worse than Spieth's as far as DraftKings and FanDuel both go. I mean, their prices are kind of about the same for all intents and purposes. And so I do think Spieth should be the favorite here, just slightly over Hideki, and I'll get into Spieth in a second. But it's just to say here for Hideki, and then if you actually, last thing for Hideki is his recent history. It's actually not that bad. He ended up finishing T12 at the Farmers after he got off to kind of a rough start, and he finished fourth at the the SBS Tournament of Champions in Kapalua, and even though he wasn't exactly ever in it just because Dustin was running away with it, but he did manage a T4 there and a T5 at the Hero World, and struggled a little bit before that at the WGC, and then T5 at the CIMB. But so he's actually had, for the most part, some very good results, but it's the fact that the strokes gained putting is really where he's doing it. And if you take a look at his other statistics, he's actually only 88th in strokes gained off the tee right now. That's not that. That's a little. I'll just call it slightly concerning to me. His strokes gained approaching the green is still good. And so that's obviously a positive thing. But so it's just one of those things where I don't really think the course, even though his course history is great, I just don't think I still think there's some variance in there. And the fact that his putter's pretty hot, he's not my favorite play, being he's the most expensive. I get why the odds, the odds in Vegas say he's one of the favorites just because the history is that strong. But I would not be looking to play Hideki in cash. I think I'd rather get a couple of the guys that are slightly more expensive or slightly less expensive than Hideki. And so and in GPPs it'll be interesting. I do think this ownership here with these top 5 golfers should be relatively balanced. I do think Hideki's ownership will be a little bit lower than people may expect despite the course history, just because he hasn't really been in contention some of these tournaments despite the good results. He just really hasn't been in contention. And so, and we took a look at Hideki's ownership last week. It was pretty low on DraftKings. I think it was no more than 10%. I think it was under 10% with some of the top golfers around him. And Hideki was cheaper last week. So I know the course history is there, but course history is not the biggest driving factor of ownership. It is a factor, but it is not the biggest factor. And so I do think that Hideki's ownership will be a little bit lower. So I do think you can get, if you do want to go ahead and own Hideki 15 to 20% in your GPP lineups, if you're making a bunch of them, I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's actually probably a good idea, if anything, just because, Hideki is one of the top players. And maybe the course history means a little something, but just because of the ownership, I think it's, I think you could do some good there by owning him in GPPs. But as far as cash, I wouldn't do it. I don't think he's the top choice. Okay, let's move on to Jordan Spieth. So Jordan Spieth here, pretty much, like I said, the same price as Hideki. Here's the interesting thing about Spieth, as many people probably know and have documented. Spieth's strokes gained putting has been awful so far. He is losing 0.678 strokes putting. That is good for 193rd on tour, and so that's obviously going to change. Jordan Spieth we know is one of the best putters on tour. Maybe not be statistically the best, but he is definitely up there. He's one of the best. Definitely the best mid-range putter. I'll give him that, certainly, as we have seen. He makes way too many. He makes an insane amount of putts from 10 to 15 feet. But so if we do take a look at Spieth here so far this year, he finished T3 at the Hero World down at the Bahamas. Finished 9th at Kapalua after he got off to a horrible start on that first round, and then he kind of played pretty solid golf. Still, wouldn't have won by any means, but he played solid. And then he finished T18 at the Sony, and so his strokes gained off the tee to green, approaching the green, all of that is great. Actually, Spieth's been pretty solid there, and that's actually kind of a good thing to see. I mean, I actually don't remember if actually, let me see. I can probably figure this out. There's only 8 measured rounds here for Spieth. Yeah, so okay, they're not the strokes gained statistics do not factor in the Hero World Challenge. So we have to remember these statistics that we're looking at for 2018 for Spieth are only factoring in 2 rounds, Kapalua and the Sony. And so obviously that's a very limited sample, so these numbers are going to be obviously particularly skewed here early on. But I do think it is a good sign that Spieth is at least playing well tee to green here thus far. And so I think Spieth is actually the odds-on favorite just because the putter ran so poorly on him in the first 2 rounds of the year. And so I do think that's going to turn around here for him. I think he's perfectly played. I would prefer Spieth over Hideki just in both formats, both cash and GPPs. Spieth's ownership, I'm actually will be a little bit higher than Hideki's here at Phoenix. But I still think Spieth's a better option, and just because of the strokes gained putting, it pretty much is that simple. So, and I really like that Spieth's approaching the green. His numbers are very good. As long as Spieth's always going to have a good putter in the long run, I think. And as far as the approaching the green, if Spieth's strokes gained approaching the green is sharp, then he is definitely one of the top-notch golfers. That's the big key for Spieth, is if the iron play and the approaches are dialed in, he's going to be one of the top golfers each week. He won't be the greatest course fit sometimes on some of the driving accuracy courses or certain courses that he may end up getting on down the road, but for the most part, Spieth's always going to be one of the top guys, kind of obviously. So, moving on to Jon Rahm. The one thing about Rahm here, kind of similar to Spieth, he's losing 0.177 strokes putting. He is killing it off the tee. Obviously, Rahm just seems to be pounding at 320 down the middle every time. Tee to green is great. His approaching the green is okay. It's decent. He's 76th right now in approaching the green at 0.22 strokes gained. Approach or gaining on the field, so that's solid, and I'm sure that'll improve. But the putter hasn't been exactly great to Rahm, and it kind of let him down there at Torrey Pines a little bit, and that happens. I mean, Rahm hit a lot of good putts that just did not drop, it seemed like, throughout the round. I kind of lost track of Rahm on Sunday just because there was a lot happening on Sunday elsewhere on the golf course at Torrey, but it did seem like that Rahm was hitting a lot of good putts that just did not end up dropping, and that happens very easily at Torrey Pines, and so and the stats, obviously, as we see here, back it up a little bit. So as far as Rahm's, what do we call it here? The recent history. He ended up kind of falling back to T29 at Torrey. I think he played better than that personally. And then obviously we know he won the Career Builder, came in second at Kapalua to DJ, and then he won over in Europe back in November. And so Rahm's obviously on a pretty good roll here. And obviously there's the whole Arizona State thing for Jon Rahm. I'm actually not 100% sure. Sometimes the college golf thing's a little bit funny. If somebody thinks that you play college golf at a, like if there's a PGA Tour tournament at in a big city, and then the school that this player went to is in that city, they automatically assume that, oh, they know this course really well. That's not necessarily the case. I do think, though, Jon Rahm actually has played here quite a bit, though, in particular. I think there is a specific tie here for Arizona State and TPC Scottsdale. So I do think Rahm actually knows this course a little bit better, having said what I just said there about the college golf thing. But so a lot of the times the best course, home course advantage type of things is where you grew up playing, because you're actually practicing there like 24/7 growing up, and you know everything, as opposed to necessarily, just you're living in the same city and you played it maybe like a couple extra times like 5 years ago or something. But I do think Rahm knows this a little bit better. And like I said, so the putter's not running particularly hot for Rahm. He's been very good off the tee. The iron play's fine. I think Rahm's a great option here. I do think he actually will end up being the highest owned golfer of these top five. That would be my guess here, at least on DraftKings, I think, at 11K, just because you're not paying that much more than the two guys below him, and Rahm's been better than Fowler and JT. And then I do think that they're going to like that, I just think if you're, honestly, if you ask actually anybody right now coming into this field between these five guys, who would you just want straight up the most, and you just said forget price, who would you want the most? I'm really actually wondering if if the majority would end up saying Jon Rahm. I think there's a potential for that. It does seem like there's just a lot of buzz around him, just in particular as of late. And so, but I do think there is good reasons to use him, because the strokes gained putting element, like I had mentioned, I'm going to keep hammering that one quite a bit here this year as far as that goes. And another big reason for that is like Ryan Palmer. I tweeted this out. I believe it was during Thursday's round when Ryan Palmer was playing well at Torrey Pines, and I made the point that Ryan Palmer's been on tour for a very long time, and they've been tracking strokes gained putting back to like 2004, at least for when Ryan Palmer was on tour. And from like 04 through 2015, Ryan Palmer had only been negative strokes gained putting like in one season throughout that entire time, and it wasn't even by that much. And then he obviously had the injury last season, and that is where it was the shoulder injury, but his strokes gained putting actually was just abysmal. He was one of the worst putters on tour last year, and he started off this season just in his couple rounds not putting very well and everything like that. I just made the point that's like, look, we have a perfectly very well established putting history of Ryan Palmer. that it doesn't make sense that all of a sudden he goes from being at least a decent putter to being one of the worst putters. It made absolutely no sense, and there were no signs of yips or anything like that from Palmer, I don't think at all. And so, in any case, and then Ryan Palmer, his putter ran well at Torrey Pines, and kind of better to where our strokes gained putting regression tool comes in handy. And so, it's a thing I do like to hammer home quite a bit, obviously, as you can tell. And this is kind of one of those things with Rahm, at least in a small sample size, that I do think that like Rahm and Spieth are probably your two best options here of the top 5 golfers, just straight up. And I think the price here is just, the prices are close enough that I think it's fine that you can do those too. As far as, I'll just move on to Ricky Fowler, Justin Thomas. Fowler has played well here the last couple of years. He almost won both years, actually, I should say. Let me pull this up here. Where the heck is it? Ricky Fowler, yeah. He finished T4 last year. He finished second in 2016. I think that's when he lost the playoff to Hideki. But he was actually a little bit bumpy there before that. T46, missed a couple cuts in 2014 and 2013, and then he had some good a few good finishes before that. But so Ricky's been a little bit up and down here, but he's had obviously some very good finishes as well. The one thing as far as Fowler goes, he is gaining 0.323 strokes putting, but that's actually pretty much right in line with what we expect him to do. So Fowler's been a decent putter, but we expect him to be a decent putter. He definitely earned that last year and over the last couple of seasons, I should say. And so Fowler's putter regressed on him definitely at Torrey Pines. He could make anything on Friday from what I could see. You have to remember also the strokes gained statistics do not factor in the North Course stats from last week, or when they're playing at the Career Builder, it does not factor in the Nicklaus Tournament course or the La Quinta Country Club. It only factored in the Stadium course, and the reason for that is because they didn't have shot link or shot tracer, if you will, on those courses. They only had them at like the primary golf course. So they only had it at the South Course last week, and they only had it at the Stadium course the week before that. So again, even these are pretty limited samples we're dealing with here, obviously, as I'm going through these. But so the positive things about Fowler is that his strokes gained off the tee is good, and his putter is decent, but it's like not running like super hot or out of the ordinary and everything. But the one negative I actually really don't like about Fowler for right now, just as far as his start to the year, he's losing 0.171 strokes approaching the green. He's at 138th. His ball striking actually hasn't been very good here to start the season, which is a little bit puzzling. And so, do I think Fowler's fine to use in GPPs if you're making a lot of lineups? Yes, I do. I would not use Fowler in cash, though. I don't think that that's the right play. I think Spieth and Rahm are your best options in the cash department as far as that goes, and so just kind of my feelings on that. And then I'll just wrap up here with Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas, definitely a good candidate for the strokes gained putting regression tool. He is 178th in strokes gained putting, minus 4.28 strokes putting. And if you remember, for Justin Thomas, let's see, it's factoring in 8 measured rounds for Justin. So actually, this is only factoring in the Sony and the Century Tournament of Champions. Or I keep saying SBS or if it's Century. I don't even remember what the sponsor is at. It's at Kapalua. You know what I'm talking about. So it's actually not factoring in the fall season. That's actually kind of interesting. Maybe it is, and the measured rounds is wrong. I don't know. Anyways, but as far as Justin Thomas goes, the strokes gained putting has been running really poorly for him. That's going to change for JT. He's at least an average putter, if not a decent putter. Let's take a look here. We expect Justin Thomas to be a little bit above average. Yeah, we're expecting him to be positive, a little above average right now, and he's losing strokes here, obviously, at minus 0.428. So yeah, we're expecting Justin Thomas to show some pretty good positive regression here. As far as the recent performance go, I know it doesn't look quite as good just because he finished T14 at Sony and he didn't play very well at Kapalua, obviously. But I think a lot of that has to do with the putter, and he obviously had a very good fall season. And this isn't really a course where driving accuracy matters if you're worried at all about Justin Thomas. It's like spraying it a little bit, like maybe potentially. Or maybe you're concerned about that with Spieth a little bit sometimes. This is not a course where the fairways are pretty wide here for the most part, and and everything like that. So it's usually not too big of a factor. So I think Justin Thomas is actually probably a very solid choice in GPPs. As far as cash goes, I think you can do cash for him. If you've got a way you're constructing a certain lineup that you just can't comfortably fit Spieth and Rahm together, but you can do Spieth and JT or Rahm and JT or something like that with just maybe a couple guys you particularly like with how it stacks out value-wise. as far as the cheaper ones. I do think you could probably do Justin Thomas in cash, and I think that's fine just because, I mean, I would rather have Justin Thomas than Mark Leishman or Daniel Berger or anybody below there. But I would say Spieth and Rahm I would put a slight notch above Justin Thomas. Not by much, but just a little bit. So, but GPP is definitely fine for JT one way or the other. So. I think that's it for this week. Yeah, as far as this tournament goes, just to kind of wrap it up because maybe I didn't mention it, this tournament is kind of on the easier side. It actually isn't yield a ton of birdies or eagles, though. It does yield some. It's like middle of the road. But really where this becomes an easier course is that you just don't usually see many big numbers on this course. And if you do, it's usually on like the 15th hole where there's the water on the par 5, but there's a lot of birdies there too. That's like the one hole where you get some higher variance. And even on 17, if somebody drives in the water, they usually just make a bogey at the absolute worst. And then 18's a little bit of a tougher driving hole. But like for the most part, there just isn't a ton of trouble you can get into on this course. So there aren't many bogeys and double bogeys. There are just a lot of pars, and then there are like, you know, an average amount of birdies and eagles, and it just kind of works out to being kind of one of the easier courses overall. And so. So take with what you will, and then I will have more thoughts on the forum as far as like maybe some of the cheaper golfers I like and don't like, things of that nature. And so thanks for watching. I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners on Twitter at DFantasyWinners. And thanks for all the subscriptions and likes to the YouTube channel and the videos we're doing. All right, good luck, everybody.